What happens when a single letter can expose the lies that built an empire? For Kate Anderson, a 28-year-old server struggling to pay her grandmother's medical bills in Portland, that letter was hidden inside an old music box she'd inherited. For Alexander Stone, a steel magnate worth $4 billion, it was the document that would crack the foundation of his family's legacy. She was just trying to sell her grandmother's belongings to cover the mounting healthcare costs. He was just another arrogant businessman dining at the upscale restaurant where she worked. But when she noticed the antique emerald ring on his finger, identical to the one her grandmother wore until her dying day, a simple comment would ignite a firestorm that would expose generations of betrayal, theft, and murder. This isn't a story about coincidence. This is the story of how a faded letter in an elderly woman's treasures would reveal that some fortunes are built on the graves of the innocent. The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast dancing shadows across the pristine white tablecloths as Kate Anderson balanced 3 steaming plates on her arm, the aroma of truffle-infused halibut and saffron risotto wafting upward. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed, despite the 12-hour shift stretching behind her, and her auburn hair remained pinned in an elegant chignon, despite the chaos of Portland's busiest fine dining establishment. At 28, she had been serving tables for 6 years, long enough to recognize the subtle differences between new money's flashy displays of Rolex watches and designer handbags, and old money's quiet confidence expressed through understated cashmere and family heirloom jewelry that spoke of generations of wealth. Thursday nights at the restaurant were always busy, but Kate's mind was elsewhere, calculating the devastating numbers that haunted her days. $3,200 for this month's experimental treatment, $850 for the specialized medications not covered by Medicare, and $400 for the private room at Willowbrook Hospice that ensured her grandmother's final days would be spent in dignity rather than in the overcrowded ward where other patients moaned through the night. Her grandmother Ruth's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The pancreatic cancer had spread to her liver, and the treatments not covered by Medicare were bleeding Kate dry, forcing her to work double shifts 6 days a week while watching the woman who raised her waste away. At table 12 sat a man who commanded attention without demanding it. Alexander Stone was 50 years old, with steel-grey hair swept back from a face that belonged in oil portraits of railroad barons and industrial titans. His navy Armani suit was perfectly tailored to his lean frame, the subtle pinstripes catching the restaurant's warm lighting, and his Italian leather shoes gleamed with the kind of polish that spoke of personal valets and old-world craftsmanship. When he moved, there was an economy of motion that spoke of absolute control, every gesture deliberate, every glance calculated. Kate had served him twice before. He always ordered the same Dover sole with a glass of Chablis, spoke in clipped, precise sentences, and left exactly 20% down to the penny. He was the kind of man who never had to raise his voice because his quiet authority was more intimidating than any amount of shouting. As she approached with his usual Dover sole, prepared with lemon verbena and accompanied by roasted fingerling potatoes, Kate noticed something that made her stop mid-step, nearly dropping the bone china plate that cost more than her weekly rent. On his right hand was an antique ring unlike anything she'd ever seen in the restaurant's parade of wealthy clientele. The band was crafted from white gold, twisted into an intricate Celtic knot pattern that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Each knot was perfectly symmetrical, speaking of master craftsmanship from an era when such work was done entirely by hand. Set in the center was a square-cut emerald the size of a dime, deep green as forest shadow, so clear and flawless it seemed to hold its own light. Surrounding the emerald were 12 tiny diamonds arranged in a perfect circle, each one catching the chandelier's light and throwing it back in brilliant flashes that danced across the white tablecloth like captured stars. Kate's breath caught in her throat, and her free hand instinctively moved to touch the base of her neck, where beneath her uniform hung a thin gold chain. The ring on Alexander Stone's finger was identical, absolutely impossibly identical, to the one her grandmother had worn every single day since Kate could remember. Even now, lying in the hospice bed with IVs threading through her paper-thin skin, Ruth's frail fingers still bore that same extraordinary piece. Kate had held her grandmother's ring countless times as a child, tracing the intricate Celtic knots with her small fingers, while Ruth told her stories of the old country and family legends. She knew every groove, every facet of that emerald, every tiny diamond that surrounded it. The ring before her wasn't just similar, it was an exact duplicate, down to a microscopic chip on the third knot from the left that Kate had always thought made her grandmother's ring unique. "Your Dover soul, Mr. Stone," Kate managed, setting down the plate with hands that trembled slightly. Alexander looked up from his phone, his pale blue eyes meeting hers briefly. "Thank you." Kate hesitated, knowing she should walk away, but the sight of that ring had unlocked a memory of her grandmother's voice. "This ring tells a story, Katie. Someday, when I'm gone, you'll understand what it means." "Excuse me, sir," Kate said quietly. "That's a beautiful ring. May I ask where you got it?" Alexander's expression shifted from polite indifference to sharp attention. His eyes narrowed slightly as he examined her face. "It belonged to my grandfather, Edmund Stone. It's been in my family since 1925. "That's interesting," Kate replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "My grandmother has one just like it. Same emerald, same Celtic design, everything." The temperature at the table seemed to drop several degrees. Alexander set down his fork with deliberate precision and looked directly at her. "That's impossible. This ring was custom-made by Fabergé for my grandfather. It's completely unique, one of a kind." Kate felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not mistaken, sir. I've seen my grandmother's ring thousands of times. They're identical. Your grandmother's name..." His voice had taken on a quality that reminded Kate of winter wind. "Ruth Anderson. Well, Ruth O'Sullivan originally, before she married my grandfather." Something flickered across Alexander's face, not recognition exactly, but a kind of alarm. He pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. "What year was she born?" 1928. "Why do you..." "Ruth Colleen O'Sullivan?" Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper, his face having gone pale. Kate's heart began to race. "Yes. How did you know her middle name?" Alexander stared at her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather business card holder. He extracted a card and placed it on the table. "I need you to bring me that ring. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. My office address is on the card. I can't just take my grandmother's ring. Miss Anderson." His voice cut through her protest like a blade. "If your grandmother truly has a ring identical to mine, then either she's a thief or someone in my family has been lying for nearly a century. Either way, we need to resolve this immediately." He stood abruptly, dropped $200 on the table, and walked away without another word, leaving Kate standing there with racing pulse and trembling hands. The next morning, Kate sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed in the palliative care wing of Willowbrook Hospice, studying the ring on Ruth's finger with new eyes. The morning light streaming through the tall windows revealed details she had never noticed before. Tiny engravings inside each Celtic knot, so small they were almost invisible, and a maker's mark on the inside of the band that looked like intertwined letters. In the harsh fluorescent light, mixed with natural sunlight, every detail was crystal clear, the intricate Celtic knotwork that seemed to move and flow even in stillness, the square emerald that caught light from impossible angles, the 12 surrounding diamonds that twinkled like a constellation of stars. It was undeniably, unmistakably identical to Alexander Stone's ring, down to that same microscopic chip on the third knot that Kate had always thought made her grandmother's piece unique in all the world. Ruth stirred in her adjustable bed, the soft mechanical hum of the morphine drip mixing with the distant sounds of the hospice, quiet conversations in the hallway, the gentle chiming of elevator doors, the muffled sobs of families saying their goodbyes. despite the ravages of illness that had stolen 30 pounds from her once robust frame and turned her skin translucent as parchment. Her pale blue eyes remained sharp as ever, holding the accumulated wisdom and pain of 95 years of living. "Katie, dear, you look troubled." Kate took her grandmother's hand gently. "Grandma, I need to ask you about your ring." Ruth's expression immediately became guarded. "What about it?" "A man came into the restaurant last night. He had a ring exactly like yours. He says his was made by Fabergé in 1925 for his grandfather." Ruth was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with decades of buried pain. "I've been waiting for this day my whole life," she said. "I always knew eventually someone would come asking questions about the ring." "What do you mean?" Ruth struggled to sit up in the mechanized hospital bed, and Kate helped her adjust the stack of pillows that had been specially ordered to ease the pressure on her fragile spine. "The ring belonged to my mother, Katherine O'Sullivan. She came to America from County Cork in 1924, just 18 years old, with nothing but a battered suitcase and a letter of introduction from the parish priest. She was beautiful, Katie. Jet-black hair that shone like silk, eyes the color of sea glass, and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. She worked as a maid for a wealthy family in Boston's Beacon Hill, the Stones. She was just 17 when she started working there, scrubbing floors in their mansion that had more rooms than our entire tenement building had families." Kate's stomach dropped. "The Stones? As in Alexander Stone's grandfather, Edmund Stone?" "Yes." Ruth's voice became bitter. "My mother was beautiful, Katie. Too beautiful for her own good. Edmund Stone was married, but that didn't stop him from pursuing a 17-year-old girl who couldn't say no without losing her job." The implications hit Kate like a physical blow. "Your mother and Edmund Stone, she became pregnant. With me?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "When Edmund's wife found out about the affair, she demanded my mother be dismissed immediately. But Edmund was clever. He couldn't have rumors spreading about his indiscretions, especially with a child on the way." Kate gripped her grandmother's hand tighter. "What did he do?" "He gave my mother this ring and $500, a fortune in 1928, and told her to disappear. He said if she ever tried to contact him or make any claims against the family, he would have her arrested for theft. He claimed she had stolen the ring from his wife's jewelry collection. The cruelty of it was breathtaking." "So you're Alexander Stone's aunt," Ruth finished quietly. "Edmund Stone was my father, though he never acknowledged it. My mother raised me alone, working as a seamstress until her fingers were too arthritic to thread a needle. She died when I was 16, still wearing that ring, still carrying his secret." Kate felt tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you ever tell me? What was the point?" "The Stones have money and power. We have nothing but an old ring and a story no one would believe." Ruth's voice grew stronger, more determined. "But I kept the ring all these years as proof. Someday I told myself the truth would matter. Grandma, there were 2 rings. Alexander Stone has one just like yours." Ruth's eyes widened. 2 rings? Identical ones. Which means... Kate's mind raced through the implications. "Edmund Stone didn't give your mother his wife's ring. He gave her one of a matched pair. Maybe wedding rings that were never used, or he had them made special," Ruth whispered. "For himself and his mistress. And when his wife found out, he told my mother hers was stolen to force her away." Kate looked down at the ring on her grandmother's finger with new understanding. It wasn't just jewelry. It was evidence of a relationship, of a child, of a family connection that had been buried for nearly a century. "I'm meeting with Alexander Stone this afternoon," Kate said. "I'm going to tell him the truth." Ruth gripped Kate's hand with surprising strength. "Be careful, dear. The Stone family didn't build their fortune by being kind to people who threaten their reputation. If they killed to keep this secret once, killed." Kate's blood ran cold. Ruth's expression darkened. "My mother didn't die of natural causes, Katie. She was only 34, healthy as a horse. One day she was fine, the next day she was found dead in our apartment. The police said it was a heart attack, but she had no history of heart problems. The revelation hit Kate like a sledgehammer. "You think they murdered her?" "I think my mother started asking questions about why Edmund Stone never helped support his daughter. I think she threatened to tell people about their relationship. And I think someone decided she was a problem that needed to be solved." Kate stared at the ring, understanding now why her grandmother had guarded its secret so carefully. This wasn't just about hidden parentage or family shame. This was about murder, cover-up, and a legacy built on the graves of inconvenient people. "What should I do?" Kate asked. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she slowly removed the ring from her finger. "You take this to Alexander Stone, and you tell him the truth, all of it. Let him decide whether he's the kind of man who can live with his family's sins, or whether he's cut from the same cloth as his grandfather." Kate took the ring with trembling hands. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with decades of secrets and pain. "And Katie?" Ruth's voice was firm despite her weakness. "Whatever happens, don't let them bury this again. Your great-grandmother deserves better than to be forgotten." Alexander Stone's office occupied the entire top floor of the steel tower, a gleaming 40-story monument to industrial power that dominated Portland's skyline, like a steel and glass finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. The elevator that carried Kate to the executive floor was mahogany-paneled with brass fixtures, moving so smoothly she barely felt the ascent. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked more like a museum than an office. Persian rugs worth more than houses covered polished marble floors, and original oil paintings by masters whose names she recognized from art history. Classes hung on walls, paneled in what appeared to be genuine walnut. The view from his corner office windows encompassed the entire city, spread out below like a personal kingdom. The Willamette River, winding through downtown like a silver ribbon. Mount Hood rising majestically in the distance, and the urban sprawl that testified to the influence of the Stone family's industrial empire stretching to the horizon. Kate sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, the emerald ring in a small velvet box on her lap. Alexander sat across from her, his identical ring on full display, both pieces catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Show me," he said without preamble. Kate opened the box. Alexander's face went completely still as he stared at the ring. After a moment, he reached out and picked it up, turning it over in his hands. His expression was unreadable. "It's identical," he murmured, "down to the smallest detail. Because they're a matched pair," Kate said. "Made for your grandfather and my great-grandmother when they were having an affair." Alexander's head snapped up, his pale eyes sharp as broken glass. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Kate met his gaze steadily. "My great-grandmother Katherine O'Sullivan worked as a maid in your grandfather's house. She was 17 when he got her pregnant. My grandmother Ruth is Edmund Stone's daughter, your aunt." For a moment, the only sound in the office was the whisper of air conditioning. Alexander set the ring down carefully on his desk, next to its twin. "You have proof of this?" "The rings are proof. Why else would there be 2 identical pieces, both supposedly one of a kind?" Alexander was quiet for a long time, studying both rings. Finally, he stood and walked to a wall safe, hidden behind a painting. He entered a combination and withdrew a leather-bound folder. "These are my grandfather's personal papers," he said, returning to his desk. "I inherited them when my father died. I've never had reason to go through them thoroughly." He opened the folder and began sorting through documents, letters, contracts, old photographs. Halfway through the pile, he stopped, his face going pale. "What is it?" Kate asked. Alexander held up a letter written in faded ink. "It's from my grandfather to his lawyer, dated March 1929. Listen to this. The O'Sullivan matter has been resolved. The girl has been convinced to relocate permanently. I trust the ring will serve as sufficient compensation and reminder of the consequences of indiscretion." Kate felt sick. "The O'Sullivan matter. He's talking about my great-grandmother. There's more." Alexander continued reading. Should the girl or her child ever make claims against the family, they are to be reminded that she left our employ under suspicion of theft. The matching ring in my possession will serve as evidence of her crime should testimony become necessary. The calculated cruelty of it was staggering. Edmund Stone hadn't just abandoned his pregnant mistress. He had created a framework to destroy her if she ever tried to claim her rights or seek support for his child. "Your grandfather was a monster," Kate said quietly. Alexander's hands were trembling slightly as he set down the letter. "There's something else. A receipt from Fabergé dated 1925. 2 matching rings, commissioned for E. Stone and K. O'Sullivan." He looked up at Kate, his face haggard. "He had them made as engagement rings. He was planning to marry your great-grandmother, but he was already married. His wife died in 1924. Cancer." Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. He was free to marry Katherine. "These rings were meant to be wedding rings." Kate stared at him, the implications cascading through her mind. "Then why didn't he marry her? Why the lie about theft?" Alexander continued searching through the papers, his movements growing more frantic. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a telegram dated April 1925. "It's from my grandfather's business partner in New York," he said, his voice hollow. "It says, 'Merger with Vanderbilt Steel approved. Contract stipulates marriage alliance with Vanderbilt daughter essential. Recommend immediate action regarding Boston complications.'" The truth hit them both like a physical blow. Edmund Stone had been planning to marry Katherine O'Sullivan, but a business opportunity had required him to marry into another wealthy family instead. Katherine and their unborn child had become Boston complications to be resolved. "He chose money over love," Kate said. "And when Katherine became inconvenient, he destroyed her life. Worse than that, Alexander had found another document, a medical examiner's report from 1930. Your great-grandmother didn't die of natural causes. According to this autopsy report, she was poisoned, arsenic." Kate's vision blurred. "He had her killed. The report was buried. Never made it to the police files." Alexander's voice was raw with emotion. "My grandfather committed murder to protect his business interests." They sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a shroud. 2 rings, meant to symbolize love and commitment, had become evidence of betrayal and murder. "What do we do now?" Kate asked. Alexander stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city his family's blood money had helped build. "We can't bring back the dead," he said finally, "but we can make sure they're remembered." He turned back to Kate, his face resolute. "I'm establishing a foundation in Katherine O'Sullivan's name, a fund for single mothers and their children, starting with a $10 million endowment." Kate felt tears running down her cheeks. "That's not enough to make up for what happened." "No," Alexander agreed. "Nothing could be. But it's a start." He picked up both rings, holding them in his palm. "These rings were meant to unite 2 people in love. Instead, they became symbols of betrayal and murder. I think it's time they served their original purpose." "What do you mean?" Alexander walked around the desk and knelt in front of Kate's chair. "I mean that you and I are family, Kate. You're my aunt's granddaughter, which makes you my cousin. We're bound by blood and by these rings." He held out both rings. "I want you to have them both. They belong to Katherine's family, to you. But more than that, I want us to be the family our ancestors should have been. I want to know my grandmother Ruth. I want to make sure she gets the best medical care money can buy. I want to honor the woman who raised you and kept Katherine's memory alive." Kate stared at the rings through her tears. They were beautiful, but she could see the pain they carried, the lives they had destroyed and the secrets they had kept. "Will you accept them?" Alexander asked. "Will you let me try to make this right?" Kate looked at this man who had discovered his family's darkest secret and chosen to confront it rather than bury it. She thought about her grandmother Ruth, fighting for her life in a hospital bed, carrying the weight of secrets for 90 years. She thought about Katherine O'Sullivan, a 17-year-old girl whose only crime was falling in love with the wrong man. "Yes," she said, taking the rings, "but on one condition." Anything. We tell the whole story. We make sure people know what really happened to Katherine O'Sullivan. We make sure she's remembered not as a thief or a scandal, but as a victim of a powerful man's greed. Alexander nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Agreed. The truth deserves to be told. As Kate left the steel tower that afternoon, she carried with her not just 2 emerald rings, but the weight of justice finally served. Her great-grandmother would be remembered. Her grandmother would receive the medical care she needed, and the Stone family's legacy would finally acknowledge the lives that had been sacrificed to build it. The rings had kept their secrets for nearly a century, but their silence was finally broken. Katherine O'Sullivan's story would live on, and the Emerald Testament would ensure that her memory became a blessing instead of a curse. 6 months later, Kate stood in the Portland Rose Garden beside her grandmother's wheelchair, watching as Alexander Stone unveiled a bronze plaque dedicated to Katherine O'Sullivan. The Katherine O'Sullivan Foundation had already provided assistance to over 200 single mothers, and the story of her life had been featured in newspapers across the country. Ruth reached up and squeezed Kate's hand. Despite her illness, she had insisted on being present for the dedication. "She would have loved this," Ruth whispered, looking at the plaque that bore her mother's name. Alexander approached them, his own eyes bright with emotion. "I wanted to thank you both again for having the courage to tell the truth, even when it was dangerous." Kate looked down at the 2 emerald rings on her finger, one on each hand, as Alexander had suggested. They caught the afternoon sunlight, no longer symbols of shame and secrets, but reminders of justice served and family reunited. "Thank you for listening," she replied, "and for choosing to be better than your grandfather." Ruth smiled up at Alexander. "Edmund Stone was my father, but he was never my family. You are, though. You've given me something I never thought I'd have, a nephew who honors the truth." As the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kate reflected on how a single ring had changed everything. Her great-grandmother's story had finally been told. Her grandmother's final years would be comfortable and dignified, and she had gained not just financial security, but something far more precious, a family connection built on truth rather than lies. The Emerald Testament had done more than expose the past. It had redeemed it. This story reminds us that truth has a power that time cannot diminish. When we find the courage to confront difficult realities about our families, our histories, and ourselves, we open the door to healing and justice. Sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave is not wealth or property, but honesty and the willingness to make amends for past wrongs. If this story of truth triumphing over deceit moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of justice. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove good ultimately conquers evil. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload that will restore your faith in doing what's right. Thank you for listening.